So, how was the coven gathering?
It was fine until I came home to find that our electricity had crapped out while I was gone. The garage is an oven. Don't we have fans or anything?
I'll give you 3 guesses what electric fans need to function.
Damn it. Okay, look, just go get those Veilguard scripts from my desk while I get this sorted out, okay?
Really? I thought you had a moratorium on those.
It's been long enough. And after dealing with this, I am definitely going to need an easy target to take cheap shots at. In every draft of every script I have ever written about my numerous feelings on Veilguard, there's always been the elephant in the room of how to talk about Taash. Taash has been one of the most controversial characters in Veilguard, for reasons that are in good faith and reasons that are very much not. It's the latter that makes talking about Taash so goddamn difficult. The well has been pretty thoroughly poisoned by internet rage grifters talking about how the wokeness or whatever is what ruined Veilguard's writing and not, extremely sloppy editing and a lack of consideration for what people liked about the previous game's storytelling ethos. As a non-binary writer myself, and the only correct person on the internet, I'm here to set the record straight. Because while Tasha's writing has some uniquely egregious problems, the stuff people complain about isn't it. This is not going to be my only video on Veilguard, but it is the one I wanted to do first, so I could usher the elephant out of the room before talking about more narrative-wide writing problems. Also, if we could ignore clown shoes and the B-roll there, it's for a thing.
Heard some colorful things about you.
Yeah, I get that a lot.
So, yes, Tasha's writing is obnoxiously modern sounding for the Ren Fair fantasy vibes of previous Thetis games, but that's a problem with the entire game, not just them. Everyone in this story talks like a D&D player only quarter committing to the bit. Hell, if Taash was the only modern talking character in relation to everyone else, it would be closer to a character choice alongside Alistair and Varric, and not a symptom of Veilguard's many larger tonal issues. They only stand out because of how much they're not standing out. Yes, the barf scene made me want to cringe out of my skin as a non-binary person, but ultimately that was just one scene. Embarrassing, but not game-ruining. And yes, Tasha is juvenile in a way that seems inappropriate for a team of prospective god killers, but that's also true of the entire team. This is a game that turned, "oh, we can't win if you don't do our personal quests," into a diegetic character beat after all.
And I can't stop worrying about my new magic and what it means.
Ma'am, you were the lead scout of the Inquisition when you were like 20. Lock in. The problem with Tasha's writing isn't even with their final choice. Okay, no, it is, but not what everyone makes fun of it for. Yes, it is a bit absurd that the character whose entire arc is about having a non-binary identity is suddenly forced into a very binary choice about their personal identity. But that's an inevitable result of every single character being wedged into the exact same story structure for their personal quest. Every companion has a stupid binary choice that doesn't even make sense for half of them. Tasha's is just funny about it. No, the problem with Tasha's story writing is this. At the end of their character quest line, they have to choose between embracing their Qunari cultural heritage or the Ravani culture they grew up with. Sounds straightforward enough, but let me ask you a question. What does Veilguard on its own tell you about Ravane and its culture? What does Tasha's questline tell you about the parts of Ravani culture that Tasha likes and feels comfortable in? What are the parts of Taash that reflect them as Ravani as opposed to them as Qunari? I can give you a minute if you need it, but it won't help. It's been oft talked about that the Lords of Fortune, and Ravane as a whole, kind of got the short end of the stick when it came to actual content. The dedicated Ravane area is an abandoned beachside. The quests in it are more related to other factions than they are anything to do with Ravane, and the only interaction you have with the lords themselves are through the Heart of Valor, which is neither a real quest, nor worth a single second of your precious loaned time on this green earth. The problem with this lack of narrative meat is that it means that Taash's story, which is supposed to be at least partially about their connection to Ravane, suffers for it. We as the audience are told to make a decision for them whether they want to move forward as culturally Ravane or not, all the while never being told by the game what being part of Ravane culture means. All we get is one scene where Taash makes a different cultural dish for their mom depending on the conversation in a little dragon hatches. But that's both A, after you've already been pushed to make a decision for them on the Qunari-Ravane spectrum, and B, overrode narratively by Taash's coming out conversation to their mom. When we are finally given the choice to make Taash's life decisions for them, we are doing so with only half the information. We aren't told what being more Ravane actually means going forward for Taash, because we aren't shown what it is to be Ravane. If we're pushed towards choosing more Ravane for Taash, it's only because we're pushed away from more Qunari by the fact that Sharthon represents more Qunari, and Sharthon is written to be somewhat unsympathetic due to her, let me check my notes here, failure to immediately understand what the word non-binary means, or what it means to exist as neither man nor woman due to coming from a society with deeply rooted societal gender roles, and the cultural belief that your societal role is the epitome of who you are as a person. You know, I'm as unsympathetic towards homophobic parents as the next gay, but I don't think Sharthon deserved to get outright fridged for this. I think she just needed like 3 days into space to ask some questions. Ultimately, the ending choice of Taash's story isn't actually tied to what their story is about. And once you realize this, you start to realize just how much of Taash's story is completely disconnected from anything in itself or the world it's being written into. It's not about the internal struggle of being a second-generation immigrant trying to balance your parents' norms and ideals with the norms and ideals of the society you became an adult in, because, as established, the game does not care about Ravane or exploring what it means to be Ravane in contrast to being Qunari. It's not about Taash's status as a Dari, really, because most of that is just set up about the Devouring Storm. There's not a whole lot about what it is for Taash to be a Dari in the context of Veilguard's story, because it was all being held in wait as part of foreshadowing for a 5th game in a fit of hopeless optimism on the studio's part. It's kind of about dragons, in that the Lords of Fortune give you the dragon fighting side quests and dragons are Taash's special interest, but, like, only in a very surface level way. There's nothing about the great dragons and their connections to the witches of the wild, and thus, by extension, Mythal and the Evanoris. There's nothing about Tevinter and their old gods turned archdemons in contrast to the Qunari ideas on dragons. You know, ideas that could actually tie into the game's main fucking plot. Taash just gets really mad about Gillinane blighting dragons and then tells you some zoological trivia about their habits and biology that are fun but thematically pointless before you go off and do the dragon fighting side quest because this is the dragon game. Taash isn't even the best companion to bring along for the majority of the dragon fights in this game. It's fucking Iron Bull all over again. Weeks, why do you keep doing this? Taash's story isn't about anything thematically meaningful or resonant with the world and its greater stories and mysteries, which is noticeable because while the other characters do fail at engaging with the world to various degrees, they at least try. The other companions feel like the writers at least sat down, looked at the world, and asked, hey, what if there was someone who fit right here? Bellara's story asks, hey, what if there was an elf struggling with the revelations about the Evanoris and the dissonance between the stories and values of modern Dalish and the lost truth of history? Davrin's story asks, hey, what if a guy who shaped himself solely into a tool to kill monsters suddenly found himself thrust into the role of caring for and shaping a living legacy thought to have been lost to time? Harding's story asks, hey, what if a surface dwarf, one least connected to dwarvish history and culture, ended up suddenly and violently attached to the progenitor hive mind of the dwarfs, and had to navigate her newfound magic and perspective. Emmerich's story asks, what if there was a mage in a country that revered death and necromancy who was terrified of dying, who found beauty in every corpse but his own? Again, their various questlines sucked at answering these questions in satisfying and world-relevant ways, but at least they asked them. Taash's story asks, hey, what if there was a character who was autistic and non-binary? And is a character who is also autistic and non-binary? I don't know, Weeks, maybe you should have focused more on the narrative and world-building ramifications of a third thing. I've heard having a third thing to be about can really help flesh out a character.
Oh yeah? What's your third thing?
Debilitating anxiety.
Why's that?
And the most disappointing thing about all of this is that there was a lot to explore with Taash world-building-wise. There's the stuff with their mother learning how to be a mother despite growing up in a culture which did not do the family unit thing, which was one line of dialogue from Sharthan and still infinitely more interesting than anything going on with Taash. There's the fact that there's actually a lot of cultural blending of Qunari and Ravaini elements in Ravane due to a century-long Qunari imperial occupation of Ravane and a lingering prominence of Qunari faith in the area, meaning that, if Weeks had actually engaged with the world they were writing for, this entire choice wouldn't have happened. Or at least would have happened very differently with a starker look at the differences between pre-colonial and post-colonial Ravane traditions. Now that I linger on it, a Vashoth who was raised Ravaini delving into Qunari history to better understand themselves and the history they feel isolated from would have been super fucking interesting, would have been unexplored ground for a companion's relationship with the Qun, and would have tied more into the Elves and Evanors thematically as a story about one's relationship to their people's cultural and history. That Qunari could have had some real interesting conversations with Balara. But that would have involved Weeks writing Taash as a character in a pre-existing living world, and not as an isolated D&D character they can project all their baggage on. Pivoting back to my point, there's also the fact that if you look at the actual lore of the story, there's an actual canon non-binary Lord of Fortune in Tevinter Knights. Their name is Holix. They're canon. We could have actually engaged with a Lord of Fortune character for the Lord of Fortune companion's character arc instead of sending our Qunari to the Tevinter Imperium to get enlightened by gender. Seriously, Weeks, do you even read your own lore Bible? There's a lot to be said about Veilguard's failure to engage with its own setting, and I don't think Taash is unique in this either, but I do think they are uniquely bad in this area. Nothing about them reads like they were written with the intent of being a Dragon Age character or exploring the ideas of the Dragon Age games and setting. And the more you look at how their story arc is constructed, the more obvious that fact gets. It's the most glaring symptom of a flaw that pervades every inch of Veilguard's writing, and if I can take one lesson as a writer from all of this, it's that just because something is deeply meaningful to you, does not make it relevant or appropriate for the story it's being written for. Also, if I had a nickel for every time I had grappled with a lead writer seemingly incapable of writing to the explicitly stated themes of their own game on this channel, I would have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but it's really sad that the games from studios famed for story and world building are getting spanked in this field by a game with like 200 lines of dialogue. Also, if we can talk about Veilguard's handling of non-binary identities, I do think it's annoying that an NB Rook only gets one type of option to describe their self-discovery to Taash, without taking into account the myriad of ways people can have a relationship with their gender. Like, does this look like the face of someone who cried themselves to sleep at night over not fitting to society's norms? Really?